Man, I still enjoy living here, but when summer's over, it's over. Now, I'm sure you've noticed we're doing something a little bit different for this video, and that's because we're getting ready to go to a furry convention for the first time ever. Now, I know what you're thinking. Finn, how's that possible? We've literally seen you go to multiple furry conventions this year alone. And you're right, this isn't my first time going to a furry convention ever. This is my first time going to this specific one. We're getting ready to head out to AFC, or Another Furry Convention. And yes, that's literally the name. In fact, this is everyone's first time going because this convention is brand new. Yep, this is the first iteration of it, and that's pretty exciting. It's not too common you get to be one of the first people to go to a furry convention ever. So yeah, that's pretty exciting, but I'll be honest, I'm also a little nervous. The flip side of a con being so new is that they don't know what they don't know, and there could be a few things that could go wrong or just not be as ironed out as cons that have been doing this for a while. So we're taking on a little bit of risk here to be the guinea pigs to test this con out, which basically means this weekend could go really well, but it could also go really bad. But there's only one way to find out, and my bags are packed, so let's head down to Cali.
So as we make our way out to the airport for our flight out, the typical excitement of getting to go to a furry convention again started to build. And this time was extra special. Not only was I going to a FurCon, but this was mine and literally everyone else's first time going to this particular convention. And that's pretty cool. Just the idea of everyone figuring out everything together over the next few days kept me in a chipper mood, even while going through the ritual of trying to get everything figured out at the airport.
Yeah, that one tricks people. It's only like 30 pounds. I think this one's actually heavier.
But after a smooth run through security and making my way to the lounge to relax before the flight, something interesting happened. A realization clicked in my brain that kind of depressed some of my initial excitement about going to this con for the first time. Because, well, yes, it was this con's first event ever, it was not the first furry convention of all time. Heck, this was my 15th. I've been there and done that plenty of times. Why exactly was I so pumped for this one, when, in all honesty, I kinda knew I could essentially go through the motions and still have a decent time? But after I ate a little bit and kept thinking about this, the source of my excitement wasn't really with the mechanics of going to yet another furry convention, but more about the fact that this will be the first for so many people involved, which should make for a unique, interesting event. The rest of the travel day wasn't anything to write home about. Everything was on time, the flight was smooth, and we even got some great views of the San Gabriel Mountains on our approach to Ontario. And after landing and getting off the plane and grabbing my luggage, of course, the first comment I had about the new location was the immaculate mid-80s Southern California weather.
I know this shouldn't be a surprise, but the weather here in California is perfect, and I mean...
Shortly after, we made our way to our hotel for the weekend, the Doubletree, Ontario Airport, which actually ended up being the source of many of our first unknowns for the weekend. And it's a big resort-style property, so getting to my room was not as simple as heading up an elevator and down a hallway. In fact, here is my entire trip from the lobby to my room, and for a con whose theme was all about adventure, even the hotels were taking the theme quite seriously. Thankfully, after finding it, I was treated with a gorgeous view of the parking lot, but the real prize was that our wing of the hotel was closest to the convention center itself, and combined with being on the first floor meant getting to and from the con was going to be pretty simple to do. In fact, that's actually the next thing I did. I walked the route from my room to the Ontario Convention Center, the home of Another Furry Convention. I even tried to get into the building to snoop around, but was promptly told to try again tomorrow. So I ended up exploring the hotel a little bit more before the rush of traveling down the West Coast started to catch up with me. I eventually put the camera away and officially began my preparation for day one of Another Furry Convention. Alright, it's Friday, officially day one of the convention. And for once, I was glad that I was still accustomed to waking up early for work because it meant I could get into the line for registration pretty early. If there is any pain point about cons that I am more than happy to forgive new ones for, it's figuring out registration. Heck, cons that have been doing it for decades are still struggling with it. But that doesn't mean I didn't come prepared, and even though registration didn't open till 10 that morning, getting there at 8:30 meant I would be doing my waiting at the front of the line while the sun was still coming up and the breeze was still pretty strong. That's exactly what happened. I was one of the first to get my badge for the con, and as someone who loves physical con books, I'm glad they still gave these out to all attendees no matter what your registration level was. But after I finished unpacking my registration folder and got a quick breakfast, I noticed something strange. It was surprisingly quiet, like there was hardly anyone around. And after getting up and walking around and trying to figure things out, I realized that the downside of being one of the first people to reg is that everyone else is still waiting to pick up their badges. And as I went outside to get some fresh air, I realized that that was definitely the case. Now I get it, you can't go to a con without your badge, but it really highlights how rough this particular pain point of conventions really is. Not only were people baking in the California sun, but they were doing so for hours, meaning the 3-day con that they were excited to go to was dwindling down to more like 2.5, which again is frustrating on both ends because all of the people I wanted to hang out with were also in line. But I still made myself busy. I got in suit for a bit and attended a panel hosted by a content creator friend of mine, and after a while, we started to get into the swing of things at the con. The space started to fill up, opening ceremonies was packed, and the con really started to get into its own. I honestly spent most of my time running around in suit with friends and had a good time, but I couldn't help thinking that this would have been fun to do for the entirety of Friday instead of just the evening. A deal breaker? Not in the slightest, but it was one of the larger examples of something that this convention had to learn during its first time handling all of us as attendees. Now, this shouldn't come as any big surprise, but Saturday was my favorite day at AFC, mainly because it was the day that the con felt the most alive. A lot of the people who didn't get in until after hours on Friday or couldn't stay all of Sunday really chose Saturday to make the most of their con, and it really showed. The convention center was busy all day, panels and meetups were filling rooms, and everyone just seemed excited to be there. However, if I were to categorize this excitement, everyone was excited to really figure this con out. What do I mean by this? Well, again, as I said earlier, this con was new for all of us attending, just as much as it was for the con itself hosting it. And one of the things you realize when you go to cons that have been around for a while is that there are a lot of things about the general flow of a convention that isn't really called out anywhere, but you just kind of figure it out. For example, especially the bigger cons, there are a few spots around the space that just work well for photos. It could be because of the architecture, the space to support a big group, or in most cases, the amount of light that you get. But there are places where you just see people taking pictures around throughout the entire weekend. But here, this was a new space for everyone, so figuring out where the spot for photos took about a day and a half or so. But after a while, you could tell that most people with suits ended up taking them by a particular staircase towards the north entrance of the convention center, a place with a ton of light. In fact, it was so popular that even non-furries who attended the con were starting to use it. Apparently, a pretty famous YouTuber came for a day to experience what a furry con was all about. And before you get up in arms, I and many of the other con members sussed the guy out, and it was clear that they were just trying to run around and be silly, just like the rest of us. In fact, I talked to one of his videographers after they finished this shot, and he told me that the team heard that this was happening and just decided to show up and see what they run into. Which, if you're not familiar with the content creator culture down in Los Angeles, this is very common for creators down there to do. So we'll see what his evaluation of our community turns out to be, and maybe I'll regret my choice of giving him the benefit of the doubt, but I digress. If his goal was to be silly with all of us, he fit right in. But that kind of comes back to my main point about us congoers learning about how to deal with each other at a new convention. I guarantee you that a relevant con this close to Los Angeles is going to bring a lot of characters, and whether we embrace them or reject them will come as more and more people come to this con over time. That being said, it wasn't like us congoers didn't make any progress figuring things out throughout the con. One of the big things that caught a lot of people off guard on Friday was trying to find where the hangout spot was that wasn't in the convention center. If you've been to any con, then you know that furries love to stay up late, but the convention center kicked us all out at 1 a.m. and because everyone was still kind of new to all of the hotels, there was no lobby that everyone could migrate to afterwards. It didn't help that there was no hotel directly attached to the convention center either, something that is changing in years to come, but everything seemed to be so spread out, it made it hard to coordinate with your friends on exactly where to go next. But on Saturday, you could see the beginnings of possible locations starting to form, even if if they were still spread out a bit. Some hotels had pretty big courtyards in the middle that you could see and hear people gravitating towards. There were some spots in back corners of the convention center that were starting to populate at the end of Saturday night, and some smaller examples throughout the entire space. It's something that I think many of us realize we took for granted at those long-standing cons, but as furries tend to do, we started to figure out alternatives on our own very quickly. So while some answers were more obvious than others, you could see that over time, the con attendees were learning and adapting to their new space quite easily, which, as someone who thinks about the fandom maybe a little too much, was really fun to see and be a part of. And honestly, that's the real reason why Saturday was my favorite day of the entire weekend. As usual, things started to slow down a little bit on Sunday. People started to leave, and those who stayed were moving a bit slower after partying all Saturday night. It was that day to do or grab anything you didn't get to the previous 2 days before you had to head out. And that was the same with me. I did one last round in the dealer's den, finally got a chance to talk with the charity and check out the live foxes that they brought, and had some time to just enjoy the company of my friends both in and out of suit. And as the art polls really started to fill up with stickers and drawings and fursuiters got their last pictures in, you could really get a sense that most people had a really good time throughout the weekend. And again, that was definitely the case for me. From just strictly looking at my experience at the con, I have no reasons to never return to this con again. In fact, I have many reasons to come back. Now, was it my absolute favorite con? No, the chaotic love that this fandom shows for itself at something like Anthrocon will still be my favorite vibe for conventions. But if we just look at what this con has going for it, the fact that this con is so close for a lot of people on the west side of the United States, it's in a warm place, heck, maybe even a little too warm for early fall, a place with food options both cheap and quality to choose from, hotel rooms that are not terribly priced for Southern California, all hosted in a space that can manage the growth that this con will inevitably see over the years. This con is such an easy one for me to recommend for now and the future. And even putting all of that other stuff I mentioned aside, coming to this con in the upcoming years will also benefit from everything that, well, everyone learned over the past 72 hours or so. The con will be better prepared for just how many people will be showing up and will move some stuff around to make the space even more comforting for all of us attending. We as attendees will figure out the little things like our spots for photos, but also our places to hang out after hours to keep our cons lasting as long as possible. This con basically has no choice but to get better for everyone involved, and after setting such a strong foundation for it in its first year, I can't wait to see how things turn out in the upcoming years. Another furry convention was such a unique con to go to for the first time. They tried a lot of things like having an arcade, backyard games, an interview booth, and even a maid cafe, all in the same spot in the convention center. Some didn't work as expected. For those who were old enough, the night market on Saturday was a lot more packed than the one on Friday, so having two didn't make a whole lot of sense. But some really did. Apparently, the line for furry karaoke was out of the door and was a smash hit. As for the con itself, it was nothing short of a success. The numbers clearly demonstrate that. And again, as someone who has been to conventions all over the world, this one, tucked in between the San Gabriel Mountains and Los Angeles County, is a no-brainer for me to recommend. And that opinion is only after its first time existing. I know its name is a bit of a joke, but ironically, it's also very fitting. At the end of the day, this really is just another furry convention. But if how well this first year went is any indication, it really has a chance to be something that the southwestern United States furry scene has been looking for a while now. A con that can really be something special.